What happens when trust is weaponized against you? This story dives deep into the psychological unraveling of a woman who discovers that her entire marriage was a calculated illusion. Betrayal, gaslighting, and emotional manipulation collide as she is forced to rebuild not only her life, but her identity from nothing.
Barefoot in a Chicago downpour, 8 months along, her cashmere robe was soaked, clinging to the curve of her belly. The heavy oak door of her own brownstone clicked shut. Through the glass, she saw another woman adjust a painting in what was, moments ago, her living room. Her husband had just cast her out into the freezing night for his colleague. He presumed she'd run to her family, quietly vanishing from his life. He bet on her being too heartbroken to retaliate, too fragile to rebuild, and too naive to uncover his scheme. He miscalculated because what Alara Vance would unearth was a conspiracy of falsified blueprints, 7 years of lies, $9 million in hidden assets, and an insurance policy that showed her husband wasn't just unfaithful, he was plotting her end. This is the story of how a pregnant woman left in a storm systematically dismantled the architect who betrayed her down to his last cent. Leave! One word. A single word from the man she'd adored for 7 years. The man who wept at their wedding vows. The one who designed their nursery with a mural of the cosmos because she loved the stars. The man who had rested his head on her stomach nightly for 8 months, making promises to their daughter-to-be. One word that demolished the foundation of the life Alara Vance Knight thought was hers. She was frozen in the foyer of their home. The home he had designed, a testament to their future? The home she pictured their children learning to crawl across these heated floors, growing up inside walls built on love. Rain hammered the floor-to-ceiling windows. A distant thunderclap felt like a warning she'd ignored. The November wind sliced through the open doorway, chilling her bare feet and climbing her damp robe. Julian stood before her, her husband and the father of her child. He held her portfolio, the one from her gallery curator, days he'd always praised. He tossed it onto the top step without meeting her eyes, ignoring the child she carried for him, oblivious to her bare feet, her shivering, her status as his wife. The portfolio landed in a pooling gutter with a sickening thud. Rainwater bled across her professional history, across her maiden name, Alara Vance, a name that now seemed to mean nothing. Julian? Her voice was a choked whisper, lost. What is this? What is happening? I don't get it. She reached for his arm, her hand shaking, seeking the familiar warmth she'd trusted for years, the anchor of his presence. He recoiled from her touch as if she were diseased, something to be shunned. I said, leave. His tone was metallic and cold, the voice of a stranger in her husband's body. Are you deaf or just decorative? Decorative. The word stung more than an open-handed slap. He'd never spoken to her with such acid, such contempt dripping from his words. Julian, whatever I did, tell me. We can fix it. We can work on it. That's what a marriage is. It's what we promised. Tears streamed down her face, hot against her cold skin, mixing with the city rain. Julian let out a short, sharp laugh. A sound she once loved, now warped into a cruel weapon. Fix it? You can't fix anything, Alara. You're a curator. You just acquire things. You spent my money while I was building a legacy. Your money? The hurt was now laced with confusion. Julian, we're a team. It's all ours. No. He shook his head, a terrible smirk playing on his lips. It's all mine. It always was. You were just too trusting to see it. Then a figure appeared on the floating staircase behind him. Chloe Shaw, a junior architect from his firm, descended as if she owned the place. 28 sleek blonde bob, flawless makeup, and wearing Alara's favorite silk blouse, the one Julian had bought for her in Paris. She looked like she belonged here, like Alara was the one out of place. I said leave, Julian's voice was final. Chloe is moving in. The security codes change at dawn. You have 5 minutes to be off the property before I call the police. The phrases were nonsensical. They rattled in Alara's mind. Moving in, codes change, police. Each word was a separate, painful blow. Chloe was taking her place, her home, her life, effective immediately. Not tomorrow, not after a conversation. Now, As Alara stood shivering, her house was being sealed off, becoming a fortress she couldn't enter. Her own front door would soon reject her, and Julian would have her removed like a vagrant, a criminal, as if she hadn't chosen the art on the walls or spent months perfecting the nursery. "The baby," the words escaped, on a breath. Her hands flew to her belly. She felt their daughter kick, a frantic, distressed movement as if the baby sensed her mother's fear. "Julian, I'm 8 months pregnant. It's 40 degrees out. It's the middle of the night. Where do I go?" Chloe reached the bottom of the stairs. She linked her arm with Julian's, a gesture so practiced and proprietary it stole Alara's breath. This was clearly their normal. "Not our concern anymore," Chloe said, her voice smooth like polished stone. "You should have tried to be more interesting." "Our." The word was a final twist of the knife. Not his concern, but theirs. Julian and Chloe, a team, while Alara was alone in the storm. "How long?" The question fell from her lips. "How long has this been?" 4 years, Chloe answered with a triumphant smile. "Since the start of the Hudson Tower project. Before you were even engaged. You were just the perfect, respectable wife for his portfolio. The one to produce the heir." 4 years. This betrayal ran deeper than she could possibly imagine. Since before he'd proposed to her on a bridge in Prague. Every shared dream, every quiet moment, every whispered, "I love you," it was all a performance. "That's a lie," Ilara whispered, her mind refusing to accept it. "That can't be real. Julian, tell me she is lying." He finally met her gaze, and in his eyes she saw it all. The cold disdain, the utter lack of empathy for her agony. How had she missed it? How had she lived beside this stranger for so long? "Your parents' house is 3 hours away," Julian said, his voice flat. "Call them or don't. I truly don't care. Just get off my property." He turned his back on her. His hand rested on Chloe's waist with an easy familiarity. They moved as one, a synchronized, rehearsed pair. "Please." The word was a raw, primal sound torn from her soul. "Please, Julian." She choked back a sob. "Don't do this." The door closed with a soft, expensive click. The deadbolt slid into place, and Alara was left in the freezing rain. Her portfolio was ruined in the gutter a few feet away. The paper inside absorbing the grime, EV, her initials, now looked like a cruel joke. Her cashmere robe was plastered to her body, the soft gray fabric turning dark in the deluge. Her feet were numb on the cold stone steps. She looked at the windows of her house. 12 panes of glass, all glowing with warm, inviting light. Her home, her art on the walls, her books, her entire life was in there. In the master bedroom window, a silhouette moved. Chloe drawing the shades, erasing Alara from view. Then the light in the nursery went out. Alara watched the window fade to black, and finally understood. Chloe wasn't just stealing her husband or her home. She was stealing her daughter's future. The nursery with the cosmic mural Alara had painted by hand because Julian was always working was now hers. The antique crib she'd found in a tiny shop on Beacon Hill. The rocking horse her father had built for his future granddaughter. All of it was gone, as if her life was a sketch that had been erased. Her phone was in there. Her purse, the keys to her Audi, her boots, her jacket. Her existence was now locked on the other side of that door. She was left with only the baby stirring inside her and the freezing rain that soaked her to the skin. A passing sedan illuminated Clara for a moment, its headlights cutting through the dark without pausing. Just another pregnant woman out in the rain near midnight. Nothing unusual, nothing worth a second glance. She forced herself to move one foot then the other. The pavement was frigid and uneven. Sharp pebbles pressed into her bare feet. Broken glass glinted under a street lamp, a warning. She kept going. Left foot, right foot. Protect the baby. She couldn't think about the ache in her soles. She couldn't think about the biting cold. She couldn't think about Julian, the man who swore to protect her before casting her out like trash. The historic brownstones of Brookline were dark, guarded by wrought iron fences. Oak trees shed icy water onto pristine lawns. The grand houses were asleep and silent, their owners nestled in warm beds, oblivious to the expecting mother stumbling through their perfect world. No one noticed her, no one paused, no one was concerned. A convenience store's sign cast a glow a half-mile away, its fluorescent lights a beacon in the oppressive dark. Clara locked her gaze on it. A single objective, reach that light. The rest could be dealt with later. Her feet were cut now. She could feel the warm, sticky sensation blending with the icy rain. Crimson smudges on the dark sidewalk, proof of her journey that the downpour would erase by dawn. The bell on the convenience store door jingled as she stumbled inside. Warmth enveloped her like a hug. The scent of stale coffee and microwave pizza filled the air. The lights hummed loudly above. The woman behind the counter glanced up from her phone. She looked tired, perhaps in her 50s, with gray hair and a simple bun. Her uniform was creased from a long night. Her kind eyes grew wide as she saw Clara. Oh, dear God. The clerk moved from behind the counter instantly, her voice gentle with worry as she carefully took Clara's arm. What on earth happened to you? Should I call for a medic? Are you okay? Clara tried to form words, but nothing came out. A violent shiver took over her body, her teeth chattering as the shock hit her, now that she was in a warm, safe place. Phone! She choked out the word between shivers. Please, I need to call my dad. Can I use your phone? The clerk didn't pause, didn't pry, didn't ask for a reason. She took her own cell from her pocket and placed it into Clara's shaking hands. Take all the time you need, honey. Just take your time. The clerk led her to a small plastic chair near the window, the kind where kids probably sat eating chips and staring at their screens. For Clara, it was a lifeline, a small patch of solid ground in a swirling storm. The clerk vanished for a moment, then came back with a thin, gray blanket, likely from her own car. She draped it over Clara's shoulders without saying a word. I've been there, the clerk said softly, a knowing tone from a woman who had weathered her own storms. Not this exact situation, not with a baby on the way, but I've been there. I know how it feels when the one person you trust becomes a stranger. Clara looked up at the woman, a stranger on the overnight shift at a convenience store, who was showing her more decency than the man she had married, more empathy than the husband who had vowed to love her for life. Her fingers shook as she dialed the number. One ring, then two. Answer, please. Please be home. Don't let it go to the machine. Hello? Her father's voice was groggy and puzzled, the sound of a man pulled from a deep sleep. Who's calling? Daddy. The word escaped her, a broken whisper. It was a child's word, one she used at 5 years old when she saw monsters in her closet, a word she hadn't spoken in years. Daddy, I need your help. You have to come get me. Please. A brief pause. Then she heard Robert Vance throwing back the covers, his feet hitting the hardwood floor, the jangle of keys being snatched from the bedside table. Clara, where are you? His voice was sharp now, fully awake and filled with alarm, ready for action. The 24-hour store on Beacon, the one by the reservoir. The tears started again, a flood she couldn't control, falling as hard as the rain outside. Please get here fast. Please, Dad. I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm coming. 10 minutes, maybe less. Don't you move. Stay inside and stay warm. I'll be right there. The call ended. Clara remained in the plastic chair, a puddle forming at her feet. It was tinged with pink, blood from her wounded feet mixing with the rainwater dripping from her clothes. The baby kicked, a soft, reassuring movement, a tiny hand patting her from within. Mom, I'm still here. We're fine. We're going to be fine. I know, my love, Clara whispered, pressing her hands to her stomach, talking to her daughter. The one person who was truly hers, the one person who would never abandon her. I know. Mommy will figure this out. Mommy will protect you. I swear I will never let anyone harm you. The clerk, Brenda, brought her a cup of hot cocoa from a machine. It was watery and overly sweet, but it was warm. So wonderfully warm. I'm Brenda, she said. You don't need to explain anything to me, but I want you to listen. Whatever that man did, it is not your fault. Do you understand me? Men like him, they have a way of making you believe it is. They twist it until you think you're the one who messed up, but you aren't. This is on him, all of it. Clara looked at this woman, Brenda, a name she'd never forget, a kindness she would always remember. Thank you. The words felt small, but they were all she could offer. Thank you for being here, for your help, for not asking me to explain. Explanations can come later when you're ready, Brenda said, patting her shoulder gently. Right now, just breathe and stay warm. Your father is on his way. And he was. 10 minutes later, just as he'd promised, Robert Vance's Ford F-150 screeched into the parking lot. He was out of the driver's seat before the engine was off. 62 years old, gray hair, a flannel shirt over pajamas, and unlaced work boots. He had clearly dressed in a rush and driven with fury to get to her. He entered the store like a man who feared nothing on this earth. A man who would demolish a building with his bare hands if his daughter was trapped inside. Clara. He knelt by her chair, his calloused hands framing her face. These were the hands that had built a construction empire from scratch, the hands that had held her as an infant, the hands that had never, ever caused her pain. I'm here now. Daddy's here. It's all going to be okay. He looked over at Brenda, and a silent message passed between them. His deep gratitude, her solemn understanding. Thank you, Robert said, his voice thick with emotion, for looking after my girl. You take care of that baby, Brenda replied, handing him the gray blanket. And for what he did to her, you make him regret it. Make him regret every single tear. Robert carefully helped Clara into his truck, leaving bloody footprints on the store's linoleum floor. Brenda was already grabbing a mop as the door closed behind them. The truck's cabin was warm, the heat on full blast. An old country song played softly on the radio. The familiar mix of coffee, sawdust, and her father's cologne filled the air. It was the scent of safety. Robert drove, saying nothing, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, his rage a palpable force in the small space. Clara wanted to tell him everything, to pour out the whole horrible story, but every time she tried, a sob choked the words back down. You don't have to speak, Robert said at last, his voice tightly controlled, as if held in check by pure willpower. Don't say a word until you're ready to. We're heading to Mass General first. Get you looked over, make sure the baby is all right. Everything else can wait. The hospital? The word pierced through her daze. Why do we need to go to the hospital? Because your feet are bleeding, because you've been out in this freezing rain for who knows how long, because you're 8 months pregnant and just endured a massive shock. Robert glanced at her, his expression a mix of fierce love and cold fury. Because I am not taking a single risk with you or my granddaughter. His granddaughter. He already claimed the baby as his own, loved her, and was ready to defend her. Clara began to cry again, but these tears felt different. They were tears of thankfulness, of profound relief. The sudden, powerful knowledge that even though her husband had thrown her away, she wasn't alone. She never was. She had her dad. She had her baby girl. She had herself. And somehow, against all odds, that would be enough. The hospital was a blur of bright lights, loud noises, and people moving with urgent purpose. Clara felt as if she were hovering outside her own body, a spectator to her own life. The red lights of the emergency sign reflected on the rain-slicked windows. Nurses in bright scrubs hurried down the halls. From one room, a child was wailing. From another, a heart monitor beeped a steady, rhythmic pulse. Reality splintered into 1,000 sharp edges while Amelia sat in a wheelchair, struggling to catch her breath. They'd put her in a thin blue hospital gown that gaped open at the back. Her feet, now cleaned and bandaged, throbbed with a dull ache. The gashes were deep, but the doctors said nothing was permanently damaged, just the brutal result of stumbling a quarter-mile through a storm-drenched ditch. The baby's heartbeat thrummed through the room, a frantic but steady 142 beats per minute, a resilient rhythm against the chaos. Your pressure is a bit high, Dr. Evans said, her voice a calm, professional mask. But Amelia saw the anger simmering in her eyes, a reflection of her own silent fury at what had happened. We need to bring that down. This level of stress is bad for both of you. Amelia's hand instinctively covered her belly. Is he okay? The baby answered with a sharp, insistent kick. Is my son all right? His heart rate is up, but it's strong. He's a fighter, just like his mom. Dr. Evans gave her hand a squeeze, a small, humane gesture that felt bigger than any medicine. Babies are tougher than we know. He's going to be fine. So will you. I'll make sure of it. Robert, her father, was a statue in the corner chair. He hadn't budged since they'd arrived, hadn't spoken, just sat there, his phone gripped tightly in his fist. The door swung open. Chloe burst in, a whirlwind of motion. 34, her auburn hair thrown into a haphazard bun, still in the sweats and university hoodie she'd been sleeping in when Robert called. Her laptop case was slung across her chest, and her journalist's eyes scanned the room, absorbing every detail. I got here as fast as I could. Chloe dropped her bag and took Amelia's free hand. Your dad called. Amy, I am so sorry. How did you find out? Amelia's voice was a ragged whisper. It just broke. Chloe's expression hardened. The whole Boston tech scene knows by now. It's everywhere. What do you mean? Chloe glanced at Robert, a flicker of understanding passing between them. She pulled out her phone. A tech blog posted an exclusive about an hour ago, right after it happened. She angled the screen. It was a photo of Liam and Olivia at the new product launch party. They stood in front of a fireplace Amelia had helped him design for the new office, his arm possessively around Olivia's waist. Olivia was radiant in a white dress Amelia recognized as her own. They were both beaming. The caption gushed, "A new era of innovation with the visionary power couple behind it all. Destiny finds a way." The post already had over 300 likes. The comments were a torrent. So thrilled for you both. You deserve this, Liam. Finally. We all saw this coming. She was never the right fit for you anyway. Congrats to the true partnership. Amelia scanned the names, investors, colleagues, people she'd hosted for dinner parties. All of them celebrating her erasure, cheering on her replacement as if she'd been a ghost all along. As if a 5-year marriage could be vaporized by a single blog post. He made me look like a fool, she said, her voice hollow. They'll all think I was the problem, that I wasn't supportive enough. Anyone who thinks that is a complete moron, Chloe snapped, her loyalty ablaze. Amy, I have to ask you something and I need the truth. No protecting him. What? Chloe leaned in, lowering her voice. How long has Olivia been his head of marketing? About 5 years. He hired her right after we got engaged. Amelia frowned, confused. Why? Because the second your dad called, I started digging, Chloe said, opening her laptop. Her fingers were a blur across the keys. Data streams, financial reports, and internal memos filled the screen. My job gives me access to things, people who owe me favors. Finding secrets is what I do for a living, Amy. Chloe, what did you find? Chloe stopped typing. She took a deep breath, and when she looked up, her eyes held a cold fury Amelia had never seen. This affair didn't start recently, Amy. It began before you were married, 6 months before he even proposed. The room swam. Amelia grabbed the cold metal bed rail. No, that's impossible. We were so happy then. He took me to Italy for my birthday. These Slack messages say otherwise. Chloe turned the laptop. Liam and Olivia were sleeping together the whole time you were planning your wedding. The whole time you were picking out flowers and writing vows, they were mocking you. She enlarged a message. The words burned into the screen, from Liam Donovan to Olivia Vance. Date, May 10th, 2019. 6 months before the wedding. Subject, tonight's a go. Can't wait. Amy thinks I'm at an investor dinner. Her trust is almost pathetic. Don't stress about the wedding. It's just business. Her father's seed money will launch the company. After that, it's our world. Just hang on a little longer. You're the one. Always have been. L. Amelia read it again and again. Each word was a fresh wound, carving away the reality she thought she knew. A business arrangement. She was just the seed money. There's more, Chloe said gently, her voice now clinical. A lot more. She clicked through spreadsheets, wire transfers, and incorporation documents. Do you remember the tech portfolio your father left you? Of course. $20 million in early-stage investments, a legacy from the man who'd seen the future. It was meant to be her security, her future. It was in a blind trust, Amelia said. Liam couldn't get near it. He found a loophole. Chloe displayed another document. 4 months after the wedding, you signed a power of attorney. He said it was to streamline the paperwork for buying the new headquarters. The memory flared, sharp and sickening. Liam's charming smile, his easy reassurances. Just sign here, babe. It's all legal jargon. I've got this." She had signed. She had trusted him without a second thought because he was her husband, the man she loved, the man who was systematically robbing her blind. "How much?" Amelia's voice was a ghost. "How much did he take?" 15 million? The number hung in the sterile air, an impossible weight. "He funneled your father's entire legacy into a holding company. That company made the seed investment in what became Innovatech. He didn't build an empire," Amelia whispered, a horrifying clarity washing over her. "I did. My father's money built it all." "Every bit of it came from you," Chloe confirmed. "You didn't marry a tech genius, Amy. You created one. Every award, every patent, every dollar in profit, all of it grew from the seed of that stolen 15 million. The baby kicked violently, a frantic protest from within. "There's one last thing," Chloe said, her voice strained. "I found it in the insurance filings. I wasn't sure I should tell you, not tonight, but you have to know." "Tell me," Amelia commanded, her voice turning to ice. "Tell me everything." "Liam took out a key person insurance policy 3 months ago for $5 million. He was listed as the sole beneficiary." Amelia's blood went cold. "I never signed an insurance policy." "Your signature is on the forms, or a very good forgery of it." Chloe met her gaze. "Amy, he wasn't just stealing from you. He was planning on you having a tragic accident. A tragic accident during a difficult pregnancy." The heart monitor shrieked, its rhythm erratic. The baby thrashed. Dr. Evans was suddenly in the doorway, her face grim. "What's happening? Her pressure is critical." "We need a minute," Robert said, his first words a low growl. "Just give us 1 minute." The doctor paused, then nodded and backed away. Amelia looked from her father to Chloe, to the damning proof on the screen. He hadn't just thrown her out of the car. He had been trying to kill her, hoping the storm, the shock, or the fall would end it all, hoping to cash in. A $5 million policy, while Chloe took over her life. The man she'd adored, the one she'd built a world with, was plotting her end while she was picking out nursery colors. "I will ruin him." The words were ice, a voice she barely knew, forged in the fire of this absolute betrayal. "I'll take every last thing from him, every dollar, every stock, every brick of the empire he built with my family's money. He'll be left with absolutely nothing." "Good." Richard Monroe stood by his daughter's side, his hand covering hers. A steady, powerful grip that knew how to build fortunes and crush enemies. "Because we're all going to help you do it. Every one of us." "You're damn right." Olivia slammed her laptop shut, her eyes lit with the righteous fury of an accountant who just uncovered the ultimate deception. "When we're through with Julian Croft, he'll be begging for change, I give you my word." Amelia looked at them, her father, her best friend. They came in the dead of night, no questions asked, just fierce loyalty and a burning need to see her through this fight. She wasn't isolated. She had never truly been. Julian had tried to shrink her world, to make her believe she was nothing without him. But she had her people, people who loved her for who she was, not for her inheritance. They would stand with her, and together, they would reduce Julian Croft's entire world to ashes. A fortnight had gone by since that rainy night. 14 days of planning, of healing, of watching her old life incinerate and deciding what to raise from the embers. Amelia had taken refuge in her father's home, in the same bedroom she'd had as a child, with its wide windows overlooking the bay, the room where she'd sketched and dreamed of her future. Now it was a command center. The walls were covered in charts, shell corporations outlined in red, wire transfers marked in blue, bank records glowing in yellow. A 7-year timeline of Julian's deceit, every lie and every stolen dollar accounted for. The nursery was just down the hall, already prepared by her father. He'd painted the walls a soft coastal blue, the shade Amelia had wanted for the home she'd lost. He'd put together a crib, hung a mobile, and set a rocking chair by the window. Richard Monroe was a man of few words, but that room spoke volumes of his love and his resolve to give his grandchild the home she was meant to have. This morning the command center was buzzing. Olivia was at the desk, buried in screens and printouts. Eleanor Vance, their lawyer, sat in the armchair, her legal pad filled with sharp notes. Richard stood watch by the door. And Amelia sat at the center of it all, 36 weeks pregnant, listening as Eleanor detailed how they would dismantle Julian. "Tell me again," Eleanor instructed. "From the very start, I need to see the entire landscape of his deception." Amelia had recounted the story so many times now that the sting was fading, replaced by a cold clarity. The pattern of his abuse, the calculated theft, the slow poisoning of her independence. "I met Julian 7 years ago at a fundraiser for the SF Museum of Modern Art. I was there for my mother's memorial fund. He was there because that's where unattached women with money gathered. She let the silence hang, emphasizing the chilling realization that their entire relationship was a calculated hunt. He was magnetic, smart, impeccably dressed. He claimed to be launching a new venture capital firm full of bold ideas. He just needed seed money to bring his vision to life." "And you had seed money?" Eleanor's tone was clinical. "I wasn't fully aware of it then. I knew my grandmother left me a significant amount, but the trust was complicated. He acted like he was already made, like he'd never need a dime from a woman. But he was broke." Olivia pulled up a file on her screen. "His net worth when you met was negative $42,000. Credit lines exhausted, loans defaulted. He was drowning in debt, Amelia. Drowning inside a designer suit. He fooled me. He fooled all of us." Amelia's voice was hard now, the pain crystallizing into resolve. "He proposed a year later. We were married the year after that, a huge wedding at the top of the mark. My father paid for it all because Julian claimed he was investing every penny into our future. Our records show he was already involved with Chloe by then," Olivia interjected. "The text messages started 6 months before you even said your vows." Eleanor scribbled on her pad. "The power of attorney explained to me precisely how he managed that. 3 months after the wedding, we were acquiring a major art collection, the one I lost." Amelia shut her eyes briefly. "I remember Julian coming home with a mountain of paperwork. He said the acquisition was a maze of legalities. He told me he'd handle it all if I just signed on the dotted lines." "Did he review the documents with you?" "No. He called it boring boilerplate, nothing for me to worry my head about." Amelia opened her eyes. "I ran a gallery, Eleanor. I should have done my due diligence. I should have read it all. But I was in love, and I trusted him. I was so excited I didn't question it. He relied on that." Eleanor's voice was factual, not accusatory. Predators like Julian have a gift for finding a person's vulnerability and turning it into a weapon. Your love was his weapon. Your trust was his key. The power of attorney unlocked everything. Olivia took over. Your trust, your personal bank accounts, your grandmother's entire portfolio. Within 2 weeks of you signing, $9 million was moved to Croft Ventures. Croft. Amelia shook her head in disgust. He named his criminal enterprise after himself. It was a taunt, a trophy, pure arrogance. Eleanor offered a grim smile. "It's what always brings them down. They can't help but sign their work." "Where did the money go?" Richard's voice was a low growl, the first time he'd spoken. Olivia displayed more files. Croft Ventures made a seed investment in a failing tech startup. He bought it for pennies, restructured it, and sold it 8 months later for a $3 million profit. "So he made a profit," Richard stated, "with my daughter's capital. He made a killing. For the next 6 years, he did that again and again. Each new venture was funded by that initial $9 million. Each win was rolled into a bigger deal. As of last year, Croft Ventures controlled assets in 12 companies valued at $87 million. $87 million, all built on Amelia's inheritance, a legacy meant to secure her future, not to build an empire for the man who planned to discard her. That isn't everything." Olivia's voice softened. "Over those 7 years, Julian also siphoned funds from your joint accounts. Small transfers at first, then larger amounts. Another $3 million disguised as loans to his company that were never paid back. $12 million in total. Amelia did the quick math. He stole $12 million from me." "That's what we can trace," Olivia confirmed. "There could easily be more in offshore accounts we haven't found." Eleanor put her pen down, her eyes fixed on Amelia. "In California, marital assets are typically split 50-50. In a normal divorce, Julian would argue these were business assets and you'd get far less. But these are not business assets, Amelia said, her voice firm. They're stolen goods. My goods. Precisely. Eleanor smiled, a sharp, predatory grin that showed why they called her the Shark. This is not a divorce. This is grand theft. And the legal remedy for theft is not a division of assets. It is full recovery. You mean she gets it all back? Richard stepped forward. Every last cent? I'm saying she is legally entitled to every penny back, with interest, plus compensation for emotional distress and punitive damages for the fraud. Eleanor picked up her pad again. Julian Croft didn't just have an affair. He committed a series of felonies: grand theft, forgery, wire fraud, and possibly conspiracy to commit murder. The life insurance policy. Amelia's hand instinctively went to her stomach and the baby moved. The life insurance policy, Eleanor nodded. You never signed that document. He forged your signature, which is a federal crime. And considering he threw you out during a high-risk pregnancy, a strong case can be made that he was creating the conditions for your death. The room fell silent, the gravity of the accusation filling the space. What's our next move? Richard asked. What do you need to make this happen? We need all the paperwork. Bank statements, wire confirmations, and corporation documents, which Olivia has brilliantly assembled. Eleanor gestured to the laptop. We'll need expert testimony, a handwriting expert for the forgeries, and a financial forensics team to follow the money. I can get those, Chloe said. I have sources. We need testimony. Someone from inside Arthur's company who can confirm the scheme, who knew about the fraud, who can speak to his intent. Leo Vance, the name came from Richard. All eyes turned to him. Arthur's CFO. He was at the office that night. He knows what happened. How do you know that? Clara asked. He phoned me yesterday. Said his conscience has been eating him alive for weeks. He wants to make it right. Richard's jaw set. I told him to sit tight, that we'd be in touch when the time was right. Diana made a note. We'll contact him today. If he'll testify, it's a game changer. Clara stood, moving to the window and gazing out at the Chicago skyline where the Willis Tower pierced the gray November clouds. She thought of her grandmother, Eleanor Sterling, a woman who steered the family through market crashes, who had seen titans fall, and vowed her family would never be so exposed again. She had quadrupled their fortune with shrewd tech investments and had passed it to Clara with a single piece of advice. Build something real, my dear. Never let a man determine your value. Arthur had certainly tried to determine hers. He valued her at nothing. A signature, a source of capital, a respectable facade. But Eleanor Sterling had seen the steel in her granddaughter that Clara herself had almost forgotten. The grit, the intellect, the will to win. I want everything, Clara said, her voice a blade of ice. Every patent, every algorithm, every share. I want his company. I want the penthouse. He can walk away with nothing but the watch on his wrist. That's a tall order, Diana said. Is it achievable? Diana tapped her pen on her notepad. With what we suspect, yes, but it will be a battle. Arthur has influence. He has a team of lawyers. He's a darling of the tech scene in this city. He used my influence. My lawyers should be on my side. My family's name opened those doors, Clara shot back, turning from the window. Everything he built with my family's money. I'm not taking a thing that isn't already mine. I'm simply taking it back. Then let's prepare for war, Diana said, standing and collecting her files. We file in 3 days. Divorce papers, a suit for corporate fraud, and a complaint to the SEC. We'll hit him on all fronts. By the time he knows what's happening, his accounts will be frozen. And Isabel, she added, named as a co-conspirator. She's complicit in the fraud. She will face the consequences right beside him. Clara nodded, feeling a cold calm settle over her. A focus she hadn't known since before the IPO, before Arthur, before she let herself shrink to fit inside his shadow. She was done being the supportive wife, done being quiet, done being the woman Arthur thought he could control. She was Clara Sterling, granddaughter of Eleanor, daughter of Richard, and soon to be mother to a child who would inherit their strength. And she was about to reclaim every last cent that belonged to her family, Leo Vance showed up at Richard Sterling's Gold Coast brownstone at 3 in the afternoon. He drove a black Tesla, wore a designer hoodie, and had the posture of a man accustomed to venture capital meetings and tech conference keynotes. But his hands trembled as he rang the bell, and when Clara looked into his eyes, she saw a familiar ghost. Guilt. The kind that sours every meal and steals every night's sleep. The kind that turns every tick of the clock into a countdown toward a confession you can't escape. They arranged themselves in the study, Diana on one side of the oak desk, her legal pad open. Chloe sat with her laptop, ready to vet every piece of information. Richard stood by the fireplace, his arms crossed, watching with the predatory stillness of a man who had navigated countless betrayals. Leo perched on the edge of a leather armchair, unable to settle, fidgeting with his cuffs, his eyes darting anywhere but at Clara. "Thank you for meeting me." His voice was tight, thin. "I know I don't have the right to ask for anything." "You're right," Clara replied. "You don't. So tell me why you're here." Leo swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. When he finally spoke, the words tumbled out. "I was there the night he did it, in the office. Arthur called me in for a late meeting. We were supposed to be finalizing the quarterly numbers for the board, but that wasn't it. We were in his office when I overheard a call. It was your voicemail, then his, then a woman laughing in the background. I stepped into the hall and I saw him." He paused, his eyes shutting as if replaying a video. "I saw him drag your family's shares into a new shell corporation, saw him lock you out of the financials, saw your name deleted from the company charter, and I saw Isabel walk into his office wearing a smug smile like she'd just won the grand prize. And you did nothing." The statement was cold, hard fact. "I did nothing." Leo's voice was barely a whisper. "I stood in that hallway and watched him digitally erase you from the company you funded, and I did nothing. I didn't warn you. I didn't leak it. I didn't even send an anonymous email. I just stood there like a coward while he stole everything from his pregnant wife." "Why?" Clara asked. "Why didn't you stop him?" "Because I was scared." Leo finally met her gaze, his eyes full of a pathetic shame. "Because I knew what Arthur did to people who got in his way. I had seen him destroy careers, crush rivals, and I was complicit in all of it. The cooked books, the fake valuations, the offshore accounts. I knew everything. And I was terrified that if I stood up to him, I'd be the next one he erased." A heavy silence filled the study. Chloe typed silently. Diana made a new note. Richard's expression remained like granite, but his posture shifted slightly. A shark that had just smelled blood in the water. "You mentioned you want to help?" Diana's voice cut through the tension. "What kind of help exactly?" Leo reached into his bag and pulled out a small, metallic object, a hardware wallet. His hand shook as he placed it on the desk. Everything. The inflated user numbers he showed investors, the forged board minutes, the shell companies used to hide the money he took from your family's initial investment. I have encrypted copies of it all." "Why?" Chloe asked, her voice sharp. "Why keep records of your boss's crimes?" "Because I knew my day would come," Leo said, his own voice finding a sliver of resolve. "Arthur is a user. He burns through people and discards the ashes. I saw him do it to his first co-founder, forced him out for pennies on the dollar right before a major funding round. I saw him do it to developers, stealing their code and then burying them in legal threats when they objected. You saw all that, and you stayed with him." "Yes. Because the pay was phenomenal, because I was afraid, because it is incredibly easy to justify things when you're not the one being screwed over." Leo met Clara's gaze. "But then I saw the announcement of your pregnancy, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. This wasn't just business then." Chloe plugged the drive into her laptop. Her eyes grew wide as she scanned the directory. "This is a fortress," she whispered, almost in awe. "He's got everything. Encrypted emails going back 4 years, server logs, wire transfer records, originals next to the fakes. It's all here." "There's one more thing," Leo said, reaching into his jacket and pulling out a document. "This is the amended shareholder agreement. Arthur had me witness it. He said you signed it at home, didn't want the fuss of coming to the office." "I never signed that." Clara's voice was arctic. "I know. I compared the signatures later. They aren't even a decent forgery. Arthur got cocky, arrogant." Leo passed the document over. This proves he forged your signature to gain sole control over your family's voting shares. That's not just fraud, that's a clear pattern of intent. Diana took the paper, reading it intently. A slow, predatory smile spread across her face. Mr. Vance, I hope you understand the value of what you've just given us. I'm giving you Arthur's entire fraudulent enterprise, Leo said, standing up, and I'm giving you my sworn testimony. Anything you need, I'll provide. Why wait until now? Richard spoke for the first time, his voice a low growl. You've been sitting on this for months. You could have acted at any point. Why come forward today? Leo walked to the window, his back to them all. When he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. I have a sister. She's 18, brilliant. Just got into MIT for computer science. Every time I see her so full of integrity and hope, I ask myself what kind of man I've become. I watched Arthur steal a future from his own child, and I did nothing. If my sister ever found out, if she ever knew the kind of coward her brother was, I could never face her again. So this is about your conscience. Clara's voice was flat. Not about justice. Maybe, probably. Does the reason matter? Leo shrugged. The outcome is identical. You get the ammunition you need to ruin Arthur. I get a chance to become someone my sister wouldn't be ashamed of. Everyone gets what they want. Except Arthur. He deserves exactly what's coming. Leo picked up his jacket. I'll testify. I'll give the authorities everything. I'll do what's needed to make this right. But I need a guarantee in return. Immunity. Eleanor had seen this coming. Whatever comes from this investigation, you want to be protected. Yes, and I'm not asking for absolution. I know my role in all this, but I can't help you if I'm sharing a cell with Julian. Eleanor glanced at Clara, letting her decide. Clara studied Marcus. This man she'd known for a decade, who had attended their fundraisers, complimented her art collection, and talked about market caps in the Chicago tech scene, all while knowing her husband was draining her funds, sleeping with his VP, and planning her obsolescence. He didn't deserve a thing. He didn't deserve a second chance. But he was a tool. And right now, a tool was more critical than justice. Immunity, Clara's voice was like steel, is conditional on your absolute cooperation. If you hide anything, if you lie, if you try to protect Julian at all, the offer is gone. Understood. Now get out. We will call you. Marcus nodded, went to the door and paused with his hand on the handle. For what it's worth, I am sorry about that night, about all of it. I should have told you. I should have warned you. Done anything besides stand there like a coward. He paused. I hope you take him for everything he's worth. I hope you make him suffer for every lie, and I hope your daughter grows up knowing her mother was the strongest woman in Chicago. He left. The door clicked shut behind him. Chloe looked up from her tablet, her face alight with triumph. We have him. We have all we need. Between Marcus's files and our own discovery, we can prove wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. Julian Vance isn't just going to lose his startup. He's going to federal prison. Eleanor was already on her phone. I'm calling the U.S. attorney. This is no longer just a civil case. This is criminal. Robert crossed the study, sat by his daughter, and put an arm around her. How are you holding up? Just a few weeks ago, she had sat on her closet floor believing she had lost her whole world. Her husband, their penthouse, her future, her faith in her own mind. Now she possessed the weapons to destroy the man who had tried to destroy her. Records, testimony, and evidence that would incinerate the empire Julian had built with her stolen inheritance and shattered trust. But it didn't feel like a victory. Not quite. It felt like the beginning of a brutal war. A war she would need to fight while 8 months pregnant, while mourning her marriage, while rebuilding her entire sense of who she was. I feel exhausted, she admitted. And angry and scared and so sad, all of that is allowed. Robert squeezed her shoulder. Feel every bit of it, but do not let it stop you. It won't. Clara laid a hand on her belly. The baby kicked in reply. Strong kicks, determined kicks, the kicks of a fighter, because this isn't just for me. This is for her, for the life she deserves, with the mother she deserves. She stood walking to the whiteboard where the timeline of Julian's betrayal was mapped out like her wasted years. 10 years, 3,652 days of believing a lie, of loving a man who had never loved her, of building a life on quicksand. But she was not that woman anymore. The woman who gave trust freely, who signed papers unread, who made herself smaller to fit his ambitions. That woman was gone now. What was left was harder, sharper, and more focused. Julian had created an adversary, and now that adversary was coming for all he had. 3 a.m, the apartment was silent. The baby was still. Clara sat at her father's kitchen table in the dark. A cup of tea had gone cold in front of her, untouched. The window reflected nothing but the black sky and her own face, tired, hollow, the face of someone who hadn't truly slept in weeks. The baby was quiet tonight. Usually, she was a storm of activity in these early hours, kicking, rolling, and making her presence known. But tonight there was nothing, just a deep stillness in the place where her daughter grew. "Wake up!" Clara pressed a hand to her belly, fear slicing through the haze of exhaustion. "Please wake up! Move for Mommy!" Seconds ticked by. Nothing. Then a flutter. A tiny knee or elbow dragging under her skin, a slow turn that pushed against her ribs. "There you are," Clara gasped, the relief so powerful it made her lightheaded. "There you are, my love. Thank God." She lifted the mug, taking a sip. It was cold now, bitter, but it gave her hands something to do. Sleep was impossible. Every time her eyes closed, she saw Julian's face. The contempt in his expression, the sneer on his lip, the way he had looked at her like she was a bug in the code to be erased. 10 years. She had given him a decade of her life, had trusted him with her inheritance, had believed, with all her heart, that they were building something as a team. A marriage, a family, a future. And none of it had been real. Not one piece of it. From that first meeting at the gallery where she thought she'd found a partner, it had all been a scam, a calculated takeover with her as the target. She picked up her phone and opened Instagram. She knew she shouldn't. Eleanor had told her to avoid social media. Every visit was a new injury. Every scroll was a new reminder of how completely he had fooled her. But she couldn't resist. Julian's profile appeared. His most recent post was from last night, a photo of him and Simone at a restaurant. Not just any restaurant, it was their restaurant. The one on Rush Street where Julian proposed, where they celebrated every funding milestone, and where Clara had told him she was pregnant, seeing what she had mistaken for joy on his face. He was sitting at their table, the one in the back with the view of the city. Their table was now occupied by Julian and his mistress, as if Clara had been completely written out of the story. The caption made her feel ill. "Living my true story with my soulmate." Sometimes you have to delete the past to build your future. Here's to what's next. 347 likes, comments streaming in. You two are a perfect match. Finally, we all saw this coming. She was never good enough for him. Congratulations on choosing your own path. Clara read each comment one by one. She recognized the names and faces, women who had been in her home, sipped her wine, and listened to her speak about how happy she was in her marriage. They were all celebrating the woman who replaced her. All of them behaving as if 10 years could be deleted with a single post, as if her pain was meaningless, as if she had never existed at all. I was being gaslit. The words formed in the darkness. A whisper, a sudden clarity. For 10 years, every time I felt something was off, every time I questioned him, he made me believe I was crazy, paranoid, or too emotional. The memories rushed back. The late nights he called product meetings, the unexplained expenses on the corporate card, the times he came home smelling of a different perfume. And when she would ask, he would laugh it off, saying she was imagining it, looking at her with those patient eyes, that calm smile, making her feel absurd for even asking. I knew. Clara pressed her hand to her belly, speaking to her daughter, speaking to herself. I knew something was wrong. I could feel it. But I let him convince me otherwise. I believed him instead of my own intuition. That was the most painful part. Not the cheating, not the stealing, not even the insurance policy with its dark implications. The worst part was knowing she had helped in her own downfall. She had accepted his version of the world over her own instincts, had made herself small and agreeable, ignoring her own senses to keep a marriage that was never real. The baby kicked again, this time harder, a sharp jab to her ribs. I know, my love, I know. Mommy made mistakes. Big ones. Clara wiped her eyes. When did she start crying again? It felt like she was always crying these days. But I am done making them. I am going to trust myself, trust my gut, and never let anyone make me question my own mind again. Footsteps. Her father was in the doorway. Gray sweatpants, hair a mess from sleep. The lines on his face looked deeper in the faint light. Clara. He didn't turn on a lamp. He didn't force light into her darkness. He just crossed the kitchen and sat with her. How long have you been up? I don't know. A while. My mind won't stop. I know. I hear you pacing every night. He reached for her hand, his own rough from a lifetime of teaching. It was warm despite the November chill in the air. Talk to me. I keep thinking about what I must have done wrong. You did nothing wrong. Then why do I feel like this is what I deserve? The question hung in the quiet room, raw and honest. The fear she hadn't dared speak to anyone else. Because that's what he wanted you to feel. Robert's voice was firm, certain. The voice of a man who saw the world for what it was and didn't mince words. People like Julian, they don't just steal your money, they steal your grip on reality. They twist everything around until you no longer trust your own judgment. Until you start believing every problem is your own doing. How would I know that? Because I saw your mother live through it before we met. Robert's gaze grew distant. Her first husband, the one she never mentions, he was a lot like Julian. Magnetic, handsome, and he made her feel like the center of the universe. Then he spent 3 years convincing her she was worthless, that her every thought and feeling was invalid, that she was insane for wanting simple respect. Elena stared at her father. In 32 years, he'd never said a word about this. Never hinted her mother had another life before him. How did she break free? She almost didn't. He had her believing she was nothing without him, that nobody else would want her, that escape was a fantasy. Robert's jaw clenched. But then she found out you were on the way, and something changed. She knew she couldn't let a daughter see her mother slowly erased. She left for me. She left for both of you, for the woman she was and the child she hoped to raise. Robert gripped her hand. And that is exactly what you are doing now. You're leaving for your own daughter. You're securing her future, becoming the mother you want to be. Elena looked down at her stomach, at her daughter. The little life that gave her the will to survive that night, who kept her going when all she wanted was to give up. I'm so lost, Dad. I spent 7 years crafting a life as Julian's wife, hosting his investor dinners, championing his career, shrinking myself a little more each day to fit the image he designed. She shook her head. Now I have no idea who I am without that. I don't know who Elena Hayes is meant to be anymore. You're about to find out. Robert's voice was filled with a warm certainty. Not instantly. Maybe not for a while, but you will. You'll wake up one day and see that him leaving was the greatest gift he ever gave you. That the person you're becoming is tougher, wiser, and far more capable than the one he left behind. How can you be so sure? Because you are your mother's daughter and you are my daughter. I've watched you for 32 years and I know precisely what you can do. He stood and kissed her forehead. Now get some rest. You need your strength. Tomorrow will be a difficult day. I can't. Every time I shut my eyes, I see him. I know, but you must try for the little one. She needs her mother to be strong. Elena let him help her up. She let him lead her to her old room upstairs. He tucked her into bed like she was 5 again, scared of the dark. The monsters were real this time. They wore designer clothes and had charming smiles. And their homes were built on a foundation of lies. But her father was real too. And Chloe and Anya, and the whole team of people who had rushed to her side in her worst moment. She was not alone, she never was. Julian had tried to cut her off, to make her think he was her entire world, but it was a lie, it was always a lie. She had her people, real people, who would stand by her through anything, and with them, she would get through this. No, not just get through it, she would win. The boardroom at Anya Sharma's law firm hummed with coffee and resolve. Morning sun poured through the windows, lighting the faces of those gathered to help Elena Croft reclaim her life. She sat at the table's head, 37 weeks along with only 3 weeks left. Her stomach pressed against the polished wood, her daughter kicking as if she too was eager for the fight. Around her was a war council. Anya was at her right, reviewing statutes with the sharp focus of a field marshal. Her sister Chloe was at her left, surrounded by devices displaying complex financial data. Liam Shaw sat across from her, shifting uncomfortably, avoiding the gaze of the woman whose life he'd seen unravel. Robert Collins stood at the far end, a quiet, solid presence. He was a reminder that some things Julian's money couldn't touch. And there was a new face, a woman Elena didn't know, but whose experience was about to become crucial. Isabel Turner sat beside Liam. She was 29, with blonde hair and a neat ponytail. Her sensible attire spoke of competence, not trends, but her hands nervously sought a coffee mug that was long empty. She was Julian's executive assistant before Sienna, before he decided she was too smart, before he threatened her career if she ever spoke out, before he brought in someone willing to do more than just manage his calendar. "Thank you for being here," Anya announced, calling the room to attention. "We file in 48 hours. I want one final review of our case. Every document, every witness, every angle must be perfect. The financials are locked down." Chloe gestured to a screen. "I can prove $20 million moved from Elena's inheritance to a shell corporation within 90 days of her signing the digital power of attorney. I can follow that money through 3 years of startup acquisitions and asset inflation. I can show that Julian Croft's entire $45 million tech empire was funded with her money." "And the forged authorizations?" Anya asked. "I have 2 digital forensics experts prepared to testify. They analyzed the metadata on 17 documents, including the new insurance policy. Their finding is clear. These are not Elena's digital signatures. They are sophisticated forgeries, likely cloned from a legitimate source, but fakes all the same." Anya nodded, jotting a note. "Liam, are you ready to testify about the internal finances at Croft Innovations?" "Yes." Liam's voice was stronger now, still anxious but resolute. "I can attest that Julian knew the signatures were fraudulent. I attended meetings where he detailed the plan to bypass security protocols. I have chat logs where he told me to alter timestamps and inflate user data. I processed the final wire transfer myself." Julian said Elena had approved it from home. He was so calm about it all. Liam shook his head. "I should have realized something was wrong. The request was irregular, but I was too intimidated to push back. Your testimony provides the motive." Anya then turned to Isabel. "Which brings us to you. I believe you have something that will further solidify our position." Isabel took a steadying breath. Her hands trembled, but her voice was firm. "I worked with Marcus for 3 years before Chloe. I saw it all from the start. I saw him launch Thorn Innovations on a shoestring. I saw him woo venture capitalists and bully software developers and cook the books like it was nothing. Why didn't I report him? I was naive. I was intimidated. Marcus made it known what happened to people who betrayed him." Eleanor's face hardened. "But mostly I lacked hard proof. I knew things were off. I heard whispers, but I couldn't prove it." "So what changed?" "I got smarter." Leo slid a secure hard drive across the table. "After my first year, I began making copies. Emails forwarded to a private address, audio recordings of calls, screenshots of files before they were changed. I knew one day someone would have the courage to stop Julian. I wanted to be prepared." She pushed the drive toward Anya. "It's all there. 4 years of proof, including a call I think you should all hear." Anya connected the drive to her laptop, found the file, and played it. Julian's voice filled the silent room, smooth and assured, the voice of a man who never expected to be held accountable. "Isabel, I need the quarterly numbers adjusted for the board. The real engagement figures are down, but I need them to show 20% growth." You can hear Isabel's recorded voice, younger and uncertain. "But Mr. Croft, that's not accurate. That's business. That's how this game is played." "Don't sweat the small stuff. Just make sure the deck is ready by tomorrow." A beat of silence, and then an afterthought. "And don't bother showing this to my wife. She doesn't have a head for this stuff. She probably thinks our company runs on positive thinking." The audio ended. There are a lot more like that, Isabel said, her voice strained. Discussions of phantom accounts, orders to fudge reports, plans to hide losses from the board, from investors, from Elena. He spoke of her as if she were a child, someone to be placated and kept in the dark, too simple to grasp what he was really doing. Elena felt each word like a physical blow. It confirmed her deepest fear. Julian had never seen her as his partner. He saw her only as his starting capital and a convenient story. But there's one last file. Isabel's voice lowered. It's from 2 weeks ago, the night before Julian told Elena he was leaving. She selected another file and hit play. Julian's voice again, this time with Sienna's. This pregnancy is becoming a real liability, Sienna said, sounding sharp and irritated. She's always exhausted, and these constant doctor bills are draining our seed funding. It will be handled. Julian's tone was detached, like discussing a lagging stock. These high-stress situations are always risky, and if things go south, well, that's what the corporate life insurance is for. You think she would just have a complication? I think learning your husband has been embezzling your family's money for years is a dangerous shock. Julian gave a dry, cold chuckle. Can you picture it? The sheer panic might be enough. All that pressure, the company on the verge of collapse, the emotional fallout, biology is a fragile thing. If not, we have other options. The timing is key. The policy is ironclad. The divorce filings are drafted. When she's gone, we can finally cash out. The audio file ended. The sleek office went silent. Eleanor was motionless, her hands wrapped around her stomach, feeling her son's powerful, insistent kicks. They were planning my death. Her words were flat, hollow, as if describing a movie plot. They were plotting how to frame it as a tragic accident, to trigger the policy payout, to build their new life while I was gone. This is clear evidence of conspiracy to cause grievous bodily harm. Clara's voice was sharp as glass. Julian Croft is no longer just facing an SEC investigation. He is facing serious criminal charges, multiple counts, and the Department of Justice will be very interested in his creative accounting and the source of his initial seed funding. When do we strike? Mark's voice was raw. The question of a brother who had seen enough and was ready for war. Tomorrow, Clara said, arranging her files. I've already briefed the U.S. Attorney's Office and the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. They're waiting on our signal. We'll file the civil and criminal complaints in parallel. By noon tomorrow, Julian Croft's corporate and personal assets will be frozen. And Sasha listed as a co-conspirator. She's exposed to the same liability. That recording obliterates any chance she has of pleading ignorance about Julian's intentions. Eleanor surveyed the team she'd gathered, the digital evidence compiled, the legal strategy they were about to launch. 2 weeks prior, she had been locked out of her own home, her accounts emptied, believing she was financially ruined. Now she held the key to dismantling the man who tried to erase her. But it wasn't triumph she felt. Not yet. Triumph would be watching Julian's face when he realized his pregnant wife, the one he dismissed as a naive artist, had engineered his ruin. She addressed her small team. Thank you for everything. I know this was difficult. Some of you risked your professional standing. Others had to revisit betrayals. Some carried this burden for too long. Her gaze fell on David, their old CFO. But you came through for me. When I was drowning, you were there. And that's something I will carry with me always. David nodded, his expression grim. You're doing what I never had the courage to do. Bring him down, Eleanor. Make him answer for it. Show every person he ever cheated that you can win. It's not just possible. Eleanor stood, a hand on her belly, her son moving as if he felt his mother's resolve. It's guaranteed. Because men like Julian believe they are above the rules. They think their charisma and their connections make them invincible. But they miscalculate. They always do. Because eventually they target someone who refuses to be a victim, someone who will burn their empire to the ground to see justice done. She looked at Clara. File the motions, freeze his accounts, alert the authorities. Her voice was pure steel, forged in betrayal. It's time to reclaim everything he stole from my family. The story broke on TechCrunch at 9 a.m. that Thursday. By 10, it was the lead on every financial news network. Tech CEO accused of massive fraud. Wife alleges he stole inheritance to fund startup. Pregnant heiress sues for entire company. Aperture Innovations assets frozen amid federal investigation. Eleanor watched the reports from her brother's Seattle condo, 38 weeks along, feeling the first subtle signs of labor. The timing was awful, or maybe it was perfect. Her son would enter a world where his mother was already fighting for him. The reporter spoke with a barely contained glee. This was a scandal made for the digital age. The brilliant wife, the ruthless husband, the stolen fortune, the stunning corporate takedown. But beneath the drama, the allegations were brutal. $9 million diverted from an inheritance, 17 counts of forgery on investment documents, fraudulent valuations, insurance scams, and an audio file suggesting a plot to induce a medical crisis. Julian's face filled the screen. A photo from a product launch, smiling and untouchable. The reporter added details. Julian Croft, the celebrated founder of Aperture Innovations, faces a litany of federal charges. His entire tech empire was allegedly built with funds stolen from his wife. The 41-year-old mogul allegedly laundered $9 million through offshore accounts to start Aperture, now valued at over $87 million. Eleanor's phone vibrated. Julian. She watched it buzz. Once, twice, 3 times. Then she answered. "You have no idea what you've just done." He was trying to sound intimidating, but she heard the panic underneath, the frantic grasping for the control he had wielded for 41 years. "Eleanor, we have to meet. This is all a grotesque miscommunication." "No miscommunication, Julian. These claims are absurd. You're being irrational. The pregnancy is clearly affecting your state of mind." "If you would just come see me, I have the real server backups." Eleanor's voice sliced through his condescending tone like a razor. "The unredacted ones from the offshore data haven? The ones showing the wire transfers from my trust? The patent filings you bought with my money? Every fabricated report you sent to your investors?" A pause on the line. His breathing was shallow. "I have David's full deposition. He's already spoken with the FBI. He's prepared to testify about the fraudulent valuations, the forged signatures, the board meetings where you outlined the plan to hide the theft. David is a washed-up I have your encrypted chats with Sasha." Eleanor spoke over him. 4 years of them, including the one from last month, where you two discussed how a medical emergency would be a very profitable, unfortunate event. If the shock of the company's collapse caused a complication, the silence on the other end was a confession. She could practically hear the gears in his mind grinding, searching for an escape route. "What do you want?" His voice was small now, stripped of all its bravado, leaving only the sound of raw, desperate fear. "I told your father. I told your lawyers. I want it all." Eleanor rose and walked to the large window overlooking Puget Sound. "The company, the patents, the stock portfolio, this penthouse, everything you created using my money as a foundation." "Which means, Julian, everything. That's ridiculous. You can't honestly believe I'll just sign overs. I also require a full public statement of admission written by my legal team. You will admit to fraud, forgery, embezzlement, and conspiracy. You will state for the record that Aperture Innovations was founded with stolen funds. You will apologize to me and my family publicly. I will destroy you in court." Julian's voice regained a sliver of its old venom. "I'll tie this up in litigation for a decade. I will bleed you dry with legal costs. You and that child will end up with nothing. Then the SEC gets the unredacted files." Eleanor's voice was calm. "This is a federal case now, Julian. You won't be fighting me. You'll be fighting the U.S. government for the next 30 years to stay out of prison." She let the reality of that settle in. "And I will give the audio file to every news outlet and tech blog on the planet, the one about my unfortunate event. By tomorrow, you won't just be a disgraced CEO, you'll be a monster. The man who plotted against his pregnant wife for a payout. You wouldn't dare." A long, heavy pause. She heard a faint, shaky exhale. He was trapped, and he knew it. Eleanor. His voice shifted, trying to find that old, persuasive charm. Honey, please, let's be reasonable. We can make a deal. We can find a number that works. I'll give you the penthouse, a controlling interest, a settlement. Just stop this. I don't want an interest. Eleanor's voice was a whisper of ice. I don't want a settlement. I don't want a deal. I want everything. And I want you to spend every day for the rest of your life knowing you handed me the sword yourself. She ended the call. Her hands were steady now. Her pulse was even. She felt a profound calm, a clarity she hadn't known for years. This was the woman she'd been before. The analyst who graduated with top honors from Wharton. The woman who could spot a fraudulent ledger from a mile away. The woman Marcus had spent 7 years trying to smother beneath his ego and ambition. That woman was back, and her work had just begun. The arbitration meeting was 3 days later. Eleanor should have been on bed rest. She was 38 weeks pregnant. Her doctor warned against any kind of stress, but this couldn't be postponed. She sat at the head of the table, her lawyer Sarah beside her, her father behind them with a box of files. Marcus sat at the opposite end, flanked by 3 lawyers in suits that cost more than a mid-sized sedan. His face was ashen, his eyes hollow. The boy wonder of Boston's tech scene looked like he hadn't seen a bed in weeks. Chloe was absent. She had secured her own legal team, arranging a separate settlement, the first to abandon the sinking ship. Sarah began the proceedings, her voice disarmingly pleasant, but with an edge of steel. Mr. Thorne, could you explain the wire transfers from your wife's family trust to a shell corporation you control? Marcus's lead attorney interjected. My client asserts his Fifth Amendment privilege. Can you explain the $12 million moved from that trust into Thorne Innovations? The Fifth Amendment. Can you explain the 17 falsified investor reports filed with the SEC? The Fifth Amendment. Can you explain the life insurance policy where my client's signature was electronically forged? Marcus's face turned a shade paler. His lawyers conferred in urgent whispers, but they had no moves left to make. Sarah continued, Can you explain these emails between you and Chloe Hayes, where you call your wife's pregnancy a complication? Where you discuss how a high-stress event might be beneficial? Where you mention a $1.5 million payout? Fifth Amendment. But the words were a choked whisper, and for the first time since she'd met him, Marcus Thorne looked truly scared. Afterward, Eleanor rode the elevator down with Sarah. Her body was sore, her back was aching. The baby seemed to be using every one of her internal organs as a kickboard, yet she felt vibrant, strong, and in command of her own life for the first time in 7 years. How did that feel? Sarah asked gently. Eleanor watched the floors go by. He thought he married a trophy, someone pretty and compliant, someone who would never look too closely or ask hard questions. The elevator doors chimed. He was mistaken. He was profoundly mistaken. Sarah showed a rare, sharp smile. You always had teeth, Eleanor. He just convinced you not to bite. The lobby was a swarm of journalists. Camera lights flashed. Microphones were shoved in her face. Questions were shouted from all sides. Eleanor moved through the chaos without a word. Her chin was up, one hand resting on her stomach. The voices trailed her. Mrs. Thorne, is it true you're dissolving Thorne Innovations? Miss Vance, will your husband face federal charges? Eleanor, do you regret any part of your marriage? She didn't look back, just slid into the waiting car where her father held the door and let him drive her away. Alone in her childhood room that night, surrounded by financial statements and legal strategies, Eleanor felt the first tightening in her belly. A mild cramp, she thought, nothing to be alarmed about. Then another, sharper. Then her water broke. Dad, she called out, gripping the bed frame, timing the waves of pressure. Dad, it's happening. The trip to the hospital was a frantic haze. The contractions came closer together, the pain intensified. Her father's voice was a steady anchor. Her lawyer was on the phone, notifying Eleanor's medical team. In the delivery suite, among the bright lights and masked faces, Eleanor had only one focus. Her daughter. One last push, the doctor urged. Dr. Miller's voice broke through the fog of pain. You can do this, Eleanor, just one more. She thought of servers, humming in a cold room of glass-walled offices and condescending smiles. She thought of the woman she had been and the woman she was now. She pushed, and her daughter entered the world with a powerful cry. 6 pounds 9 ounces, flawless skin, a tuft of dark hair, and eyes that would one day be the same deep brown as her mother's and her grandmother's. "Hello, my love," Eleanor murmured, holding the baby to her chest, tears of joy and relief overflowing. "Hello, Clara." Named for her grandmother, a woman who built a business from nothing and left an inheritance of strength. Clara Vance, a name that stood for resilience, a name that would never be Thorne. "She's perfect," her father said from the bedside, his kind face streaked with tears he made no effort to wipe away. "She looks just like you." Eleanor looked at her dad. This man who had mobilized an army for her, who had built her a new nursery and never once questioned her decisions. "Thank you, Daddy." The words felt small, but they held everything. "For all of this. For trusting me. I always have, Ellie. From the moment you were born," he kissed her forehead. "And I always will." Clara made a tiny noise, her small fingers curling around the fabric of Eleanor's gown. "I made a promise to you," Eleanor whispered to her daughter. "That day I found out everything. I promised I would give you a good life. A life where no one would ever make you feel less than." The baby slept on, safe and sound. And I will keep that promise. No matter the cost, no matter the struggle, you will always know that you are cherished and strong and enough, just as you are. Through the hospital window, the sun was rising. A new day, a new life, a new start. And Eleanor was ready for it. 3 weeks after Clara was born, Eleanor sat in a boardroom and watched Marcus Thorne sign away his entire world. She shouldn't have been there. She was supposed to be resting, healing. But some things had to be seen. Some endings demanded a witness. Clara slept in a bassinet beside her, dreaming her infant dreams. The documents were arranged on the table: asset transfers, stock certificates, deeds. Each one needed Marcus's signature. Each one dismantled the empire he'd built with her family's money and his own deceit. His hand shook as he signed the first page, transferring full ownership of Thorne Innovations to Eleanor Vance. Sarah read from the agreement, her tone neutral but firm. "All properties and holdings are conveyed effective immediately. Mr. Thorne will retain no ownership, no authority, and no claim on any future earnings," Marcus signed. "All funds diverted from joint accounts will be repaid from personal assets with interest," he signed again. "A full public statement drafted by my client, admitting to financial misconduct, will be released within 48 hours. Another signature. His face was gaunt, his eyes defeated. The boy Wonder looked 20 years older. No contact with Eleanor Vance or her daughter Clara Vance. Any breach of this order will result in the immediate reinstatement of federal conspiracy charges." Marcus paused. His lawyer murmured something. He signed. Sarah collected the pages. "There's one last item." Eleanor spoke up. "The brownstone. My house. I want it." Marcus's lawyer began to protest. "Miss Vance, that wasn't in the agreement." "It's in the addendum," Sarah said, sliding one more paper across the table. The residence was purchased with funds from Miss Vance's trust. The deed was executed under fraudulent pretenses. By state law, the transfer is void. The property reverts to my client. Marcus looked from the paper to Eleanor. "You're leaving me with nothing." "I'm taking back what was mine," Eleanor replied, her voice soft but unbreakable. "Every cent of that company was built on my grandmother's legacy. My inheritance funded this company. I'm not taking what you built. I'm reclaiming my seed money." Julian signed the final page. "One more thing." Clara's voice stopped him. "Isabel, I want her gone from my penthouse by morning. She can keep the designer coat. The rest is mine." Something crossed Julian's face. Not guilt, but a flicker of recognition, as if seeing her clearly for the first time. "You were always more brilliant than I admitted," he said. "Yes, and you were always as cruel as I feared." Clara took Sophie's carrier, stood, and looked down at the man she once adored. "Goodbye, Julian. I hope that place gives you a long time to think," she said, turning away for good. Chloe's trial for fraud began 6 weeks later. The prosecution presented damning emails Isla had uncovered, testimony from the company's former CFO, Liam, and a mountain of financial records. Isla was there every single day. Her daughter Maya was strapped to her chest, a quiet observer. The courtroom buzzed with tech reporters and investors ruined by the scheme, all there to see justice done. Chloe seemed diminished, without her usual armor of sharp suits and expensive jewelry. She looked smaller, just a woman undone by her own ambition. Her lawyer argued she was manipulated by a charismatic CEO, but it was useless. The prosecution displayed Chloe's own emails, cold and callous, where she called Isla's pregnancy a liability and joked about dissolving their partnership. On the trial's last day, Chloe's gaze met Isla's. Isla braced for the usual contempt but saw only raw, desperate fear. It was the look of someone who finally understood that the game was over. "Will the defendant please rise?" the foreman began. "On the charge of investor fraud, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of conspiracy, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of embezzlement and for securities fraud, we find the defendant guilty." Chloe simply collapsed. Her attorneys caught her. Someone in the gallery started sobbing. The sentence was delivered a month later. 8 years in federal prison with a minimum of 5. Isla skipped the hearing. She was at home with Maya, building a tower of blocks. Julian's trial was a much larger spectacle. The feds had unearthed a far deeper rot than Isla's team had found. Years of deception that had victimized hundreds and defrauded backers of millions. For 3 weeks, the prosecution paraded witnesses and evidence. Julian's lawyers tried to sell the jury on a story of a visionary who simply made mistakes. They didn't buy it. Guilty on every charge. At the sentencing, the judge was brief. He had seen the proof, including a photo of Isla, 8 months pregnant, locked out of her own home in the Seattle rain. "Mr. Vance, you have shown a pattern of behavior that is both illegal and morally bankrupt." The judge's voice was ice. "You stole from your family. You conspired with your business partner. You defrauded your investors. You even discussed your unborn child as a financial inconvenience." The judge let that sink in. "The court sentences you to 12 years in federal prison. You will be eligible for parole in 8. Julian's attorneys immediately started making noise about appeals. It was just sound. Isla heard the news from her lawyer, Diane. She was in her new house, watching Maya take her very first steps. 12 years. Diane's voice was triumphant. "He'll be 50 when he gets out." Isla watched her daughter wobble, fall, and then push herself back up. "How are you feeling?" Diane asked. Isla had to really think about it. She thought she'd feel elated, a sense of victory for the man who nearly broke her. But that wasn't it. What she felt was relief, a profound release. A weight she hadn't realized she was carrying had just vanished. Then came a deep sense of peace. And finally, something she never expected. Freedom, not just from him, but from the person she used to be. Free from her self-doubt and the need for his validation. "I feel like it's all finally over," she said, "and everything is just beginning." Maya fell again and looked to her mom. Isla just smiled and opened her arms. "Come on, sweet pea, try again, I'm right here." Maya stood, took 3 shaky steps, and tumbled into her mother's embrace. "Good girl, you did it." Outside her window, the cherry blossoms were in full bloom. Life was moving forward. For Isla, for Maya, for the future they were creating. 1 year had passed since that night. Isla stood in the lobby of what was once Vance Innovations. The sleek, minimalist sign had been replaced months ago. It now read Aura Urban Design, her company, her principles, her belief in building things that helped people. The lobby was different too. The cold steel and glass were gone, replaced with warm, reclaimed wood and living walls. The photos were of community projects and affordable housing, not extravagant monuments to wealth built on lies and exploitation. Maya, now 16 months old, clutched Isla's finger as she walked. "Miss Hayes," Diane approached with a tablet, "first quarter reports are in. We're profitable. It's not venture capital money, but it's honest." Isla smiled. "I'll take honest over stolen any day." "So will our team." Diane glanced around. Liam said yesterday this is the first company he's ever been proud to work for. Liam himself appeared from his office. He had stayed, accepting a partnership role. His office was now next to Isla's. The Beacon Hill Community Project is fully leased, Liam said, giving her a folder, and we are breaking ground on the South Lake Union development next month. Isla raised an eyebrow. Which site? Liam grinned. The one Julian was going to use for that absurd glass headquarters. The one he faked the zoning permits for. I thought it had a certain poetic justice. Isla opened the folder. It showed a vibrant, sustainable community. There were no luxury condos. Instead, it was a mixed-use space with apartments, a daycare, and a public health clinic. Homes for the nurses, teachers, and artists who made Seattle run. He would absolutely hate this, Isla said, a deep sense of satisfaction washing over her. That's kind of the point. Liam's tone became serious. We're not just building homes, Isla. We're showing there's a different way to do things, that you don't have to be a monster to be successful. Maya tugged on Isla's coat. Mama, up! Isla lifted her daughter onto her hip. See this, my love? Mama's building homes. Maya pointed a tiny finger at a drawing of a playground. Swing, she said with authority. Yes, baby girl. Lots of swings and gardens and trees. All the things that make a place a home. Her father, Marcus, arrived just after noon. He came by the office often, not to check on her anymore, but because he loved seeing his daughter thrive. He brought poke bowls from her favorite spot and tucked in his briefcase a small wooden otter for Maya. A new friend for your collection, he said. Maya's eyes lit up. Oddie, she squealed, and immediately started a one-sided conversation with it. Her vocabulary is just exploding, Marcus said proudly. She gets that from you. You were speaking in paragraphs at her age. Isla barely remembered being that young. Just fragmented memories of her mother's smile and the safe, steady presence of her father. Your mother kept a book for you, he said. Wrote down every new word, every little milestone. Marcus's voice softened. She would have been so happy to see this. You running this business, raising this beautiful girl, being the strong woman she always knew you would become. I think about her all the time, Isla said, watching Maya. Especially now. I finally understand so much. Like what? Like all the creative dreams she put aside for me, how often she must have ignored her own needs to ensure I had mine. The fear she must have felt. Raising a child knowing you can't guarantee their safety. Clara paused. Like how much she loved me and wanted a life for me that she never had. She wanted you to design your own. Arthur's voice was low. Free to make your own plans. Free to follow your own vision. Free from anyone who would try to control or belittle you. I wasn't free for so long. Julian took that from me. I let him take it. But you got it back. Arthur reached across the table and took her hand. That's what counts, Clara. Not what you lost, but what you rebuilt. And what you're creating now. Sophie ran over, climbed into her grandfather's lap and showed him a toy. My toy. That's a lovely toy, sweet pea. What is its name? Sophie thought about this very hard, then said, Sophie the toy. That's perfect. Clara watched them together. Her father, who built a legacy from steel and vision. Her daughter, who would grow up knowing a woman could build one too. 2 generations of her family connected by love, strength, and the will to keep building, keep creating, keep moving on. She had lost so much this last year. Her marriage, her innocence, her faith that love would keep her safe. But she had gained much more than she lost. She had her daughter, her company, her sense of self, and the knowledge she could survive anything, face any challenge, overcome any obstacle. Because she was Clara Vance, daughter of Arthur, mother of another Sophie, who would carry their strength into the future. And she was just getting started. 1 year to the day since the keynote. Clara woke before dawn. Sophie was still asleep in the nursery. The apartment was quiet, peaceful, secure. She lay in bed a moment, hearing the silence, feeling the warmth, remembering a year ago. She had been packing a hospital bag, planning a future that was about to be erased. She had been Mrs. Julian Croft, a tech mogul's wife, a woman who had it all except the truth. Now she was Clara Vance, a single mother, an entrepreneur, a survivor. The transformation still amazed her sometimes. The distance between the woman she had been and who she now was. She got out of bed, put on a robe, not the silk one she'd thrown away months ago, and walked to the window. Rain was falling, a steady Seattle drizzle that would last all day. She didn't flinch, didn't feel fear or shame, or the ghost of that awful night. Instead, she felt something she didn't expect: gratitude. The affair had taken everything from her, and in doing so, had returned everything to her. She went to the nursery. Sophie was awake, standing in her crib, reaching for a mobile of stars. "Mama!" Her face lit up. "Mama, up!" Clara lifted her daughter, held her close, inhaling the sweet baby smell that was already starting to fade. "Good morning, sweetheart." "Happy anniversary." "Nappy-versary." Sophie tried the word, getting it wonderfully wrong. That's right. 1 year ago today, it all changed. 1 year ago, Mama found out who she was. They went downstairs. Clara made coffee. Sophie played with blocks on the floor. The rain kept falling. At 8 o'clock, Lena arrived with pastries. Maya came with flowers. Arthur brought more bagels than they could ever eat. "Happy anniversary of your freedom," Lena said, hugging Clara. 1 year since you started rebuilding your life? 1 year since you became the most respected woman in Seattle venture capital, Maya added. The tech guys in this city are terrified of you. You know that, right? Good. Clara smiled. They should be. They sat together eating and drinking coffee, watching Sophie try to share her blocks with a stuffed bear. "I got a message from Bennett this morning." Lena pulled out her phone. "The second arts grant was awarded today, on schedule and under budget." "And the foundation?" Clara asked. 47 women helped so far this year. Legal fees paid, mentorships provided, new starts in new towns when needed. Maya's voice was warm with pride. "You've built something that will outlive all of us, Clara." The foundation was Clara's idea, a nonprofit to help women escape financial control, to provide legal help they couldn't afford, to offer business training, to fund the new beginnings so many women needed. She had named it the Sophie Vance Foundation for her grandmother, who was an artist. For her daughter, who would know women can do anything. For herself, the Clara she had always been inside. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." Clara looked at Lena, who had pored over financial records, at Maya, who had fought for her in boardrooms, and at her father, who had been there from the start. "You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. You fought for me when I was too weak to fight. You showed me what real support is. That's what family does." Arthur's voice was rough with feeling. "We show up for each other." Sophie came over to Clara, climbed into her lap, and showed her a block. "Heart, Mama? Yours?" Clara's eyes filled with tears. "That's right, baby. My heart. And you have all of it." They spent the morning together talking, laughing, not focusing on the pain of the last year, but honoring how far they had all come. At noon, Clara excused herself. There was somewhere she had to go. She drove to the cemetery where her grandmother was buried. The rain had stopped. Puddles reflected the sky, birds sang. She stood at the gravestone. Sophie Vance, beloved artist and mother. "Hi, Grandma. It's been a while." She told her grandmother everything. About Julian, the lies, the victory, the company, and the foundation. About little Sophie, who was growing so fast, so smart and brave, and so much like both of them. "I wish you were here to see her," Clara said. "To hold her, to tell her your stories. She would have loved you so much. You would have loved her." The wind blew, rustling the leaves like an answer. "I used to think what happened to me was the worst thing in the world, being lied to, stolen from, and humiliated." Clara took a deep breath. "But now I see the truth. It was the best thing because it woke me up. It showed me who I am. It let me become the woman you always knew I could be." She put a hand on the gravestone. "Thank you, Grandma, for the strength you passed down. I carry it daily, and I'm passing it to Sophie, and she will pass it on. Because that's what we do. We survive, we endure, we rebuild, and we make things better for those who come next." She stood there for a long time, letting the peace sink in. Then she drove home. That evening, after her friends had left, after Arthur had fallen asleep with Sophie on his lap, Clara sat on the balcony of her apartment and watched the sunset. Her apartment, her balcony, her sunset. A year ago, she owned nothing, not even herself. She had been defined by her husband, shaped by his wants, and diminished by his lies. Now she was building an empire, a real one, built on hard work and the belief that business could help people. But that wasn't the real win. The real victory was simpler. She knew who she was. Clara Vance, daughter, mother, business owner, survivor. A woman who had been broken and put herself back together stronger than ever. She thought of Julian, in his legal troubles, and of all the people who had underestimated her. They had all been so wrong. Sophie stirred in Arthur's lap, opened her eyes, and saw her mother. "Mama!" She slid down, toddled to the door, and pushed it open. Clara lifted her daughter onto her lap and pointed at the sky. "Look, sweetheart, the sunset. See the colors?" "Pretty," Sophie said. Clara pulled her daughter Grace into a tight hug. "Everything's okay now. Everything is peaceful. Mama is right here, always." "I love you, Mama." Those 3 small words were her entire universe. A quiet rain began to fall, a gentle Chicago mist, 1 year to the day since her world had imploded. Clara stayed on the high-rise balcony, holding Grace as the city lights blurred through the drizzle. The rain felt cleansing, not like a memory of sorrow or anger. It was just the sky, washing the world clean. She was just a woman, a mother with her daughter, watching a future she had fought for unfold, a future that was entirely hers. Arthur stepped outside and found his daughter and granddaughter on the porch, watching the storm. "Olivia, you all right?" She looked up at her father, the one who'd anchored her, championed her, and shown her that courage wasn't about avoiding the fall, but how you get up. "I'm fine, Dad. Actually, I'm great." She moved Chloe over, patting the empty space beside her. "Come watch the storm with us." He sat, wrapping an arm around her, and took his granddaughter's small hand. 3 generations, bound by love, resilience, and the will to create. "I used to dread storms," Olivia said softly. "After that night, the thunder would just take me back. I'd feel the cold dread, the sick realization that my life was a lie, but now I see it differently." She watched the lightning flash. The storm didn't break me, it washed away the pretense. The fake smiles, the manipulations, the hollow life I was leading. It brought me to zero, and from that empty space, I built something real. Arthur said nothing, just pulled her closer. Chloe yawned, her head drooping onto her mother's shoulder. "She's exhausted," Arthur whispered. "We should get her in." "In a moment," Olivia replied, wanting to hold on to this perfect peace. "You make me proud, Liv." Arthur's voice was husky. "I know I should say it more, but I'm so proud of what you've faced, what you've built from the wreckage." "Thanks, Dad." She leaned against him, feeling like a little girl again. "That means everything." They sat together in the damp air, a family of past, present, and future. Finally, Chloe drifted to sleep. Arthur carried her indoors. Olivia paused at the door, taking one last look at the storm. It was magnificent, cleansing, and it felt like hers. This life, this view, this future was all hers. She shut the door, went to put her daughter to bed, and kissed her father goodnight. Then, at her own window, she watched the storm move over the city she was making her own. 1 year since the discovery, 1 year since her true beginning. Tomorrow held more clients to win, more events to mastermind, more territory to claim. But tonight there was only calm, gratitude for all she had been forced to leave behind and everything she had since earned. Olivia Sterling, granddaughter of Clara, daughter of Arthur, mother of another Chloe, a woman who had been shattered and had pieced herself back together stronger than before. She smiled at her reflection in the rain-slicked glass. Then she went to sleep, and for the first time in a year, she was not haunted by dreams. And that is how Olivia Sterling transformed utter betrayal into an $87 million consulting firm. If her story touched you, I would be honored to hear your thoughts. Tell me in the comments what part of her fight resonated most with you. And if there is someone in your life who needs to see that you can rebuild from ruins, please share this story. Hit subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story about women who refuse to be defined by their scars. Until next time, remember that a storm doesn't always come to wreck your house. Sometimes it comes to clear your path.